So one of the challenges after us buying the front end back from Terra was we actually need to make this work. We need to have a strong relationship with the retailers, and we need to change the mentality of the retailers. So the discussions that I often had with people on the bus when I was 12 with the Aquarius Festival is a really good thing because they challenge your thinking. So you need to get your headspace into how someone else thinks before you can actually start that conversation, that right conversation that will lead you somewhere. So one thing led to another, and we quickly sent an email to the guys from Coles in, trying to get the year right now, 2012, and said, this is after the $1 a litre come in, because everyone was going, yeah, this is the worst thing in the world. Well, yes it is, but let's turn it around. So we took the opportunity to convince them and talk about the provenance story and how the agriculture sector in Australia has not actually had the benefit from foreign investment that we actually talk about. And you might tell me differently, but my experience has been in our business, and probably the dairy sector, is that investment external to date hasn't actually worked that well, and they haven't understood Australia. But we were fortunate to actually come across John Durkin, who really got it. He really did question why Australia had abandoned the retail sector of Australia had abandoned the cooperative and the process that the cooperative could actually bring, or the provenance story we could actually bring to Coles. So we worked on that relationship for 18 months, and on the 1st of July we actually signed a contract with Coles to actually supply the Queensland market and parts of New South Wales. But we'd also supplied them with ice cream for a long period of time, but I'll come back to that in a minute, why ice cream is important to our business. But that was a catalyst on those conversations 2 years ago. Was also, you can't have one strategy, you've got to have multiple strategies, and you've got to have different pieces to the puzzles to the jigsaw. So we also needed to make sure that we had a strong presence in the route trade. So if you've got this dominance thing happening in the retail sector that actually says the retail sector wants to take as much of the route trade and put it into their business, and the retail sector and the route trade is actually struggling to survive. You can think of the dynamics. You've got these small guys in franchisees running small trucks. They need to rationalise, just as the industry rationalised from 1900 right through to 2000. You've got bigger trucks, you've got bigger trucks, you've got bigger factories, you've got bigger factories. And so we needed to do that. But one of the challenges is I think that Australia actually struggles in manufacturing. If you think about manufacturing, how many manufacturing sites in Australia have disappeared, not just in agriculture but in any industry, is the dominance of the major retailers has driven the value out, and the continuing increasing in costs in labour and just running your factory continues to shrink your margins, to the point where many of us have actually, for a period of time, and I experienced this at Norco, you're on the tenterhooks every 6 months. If you didn't actually continue to reduce your costs, they would actually, you would lose shelf space, and that would be the end of your business, or significant losses, which in a cooperative sense, one of the good things about cooperatives, there are some really good things about cooperatives, you just pass it down the line. There's no farmers in them, so I'm safe for that one. But cooperatives do take a long time to go break because you pass it down the line. But I'd say that's not my philosophy at all. But so we actually said, well, we had 89 franchisees, and we've worked with those 89 franchisees to increase the market share and create the provenance story. So we've got the retailers on signed up, we've got the route trade really starting to hum, but we always knew the third prong we started 2 years ago was we needed to have fresh milk into China. And I've seen, in 2004, New Farm created a report, and I don't know where all that data actually come from originally, but I've seen it presented at ABA again, and it's been updated. But there's this consistent message across the globe. There was a diminishing level of land for agriculture and an increasing population. So as we started off in the 70s with 1 acre, I think it's about 1 acre per person, we're back to about 0.25 acre per person of arable land, and that continues to diminish as the population grows, and we also destroy agricultural land through salinity and just urban population. So with that conversation starting to occur, and knowing that the Chinese government was interested in investing in Australia, we were fortunate enough to actually come across, and some of it was stumble, but it's in the back of our mind, but when you're thinking about things, you actually find things too. And when you start talking about it, you actually puts other people onto the track. So we started to talk to the Chinese about, you don't have to buy an asset in Australia, we can actually make it for you. All we do is create a relationship that actually means that we can do things together. So we started to work on that relationship, but we knew we needed to create multiple layer approach. We needed to actually be able to deliver fresh milk into China. Milk has a shelf life of, depending on how much you want to put on it, but somewhere between 18 and 22 days. Now, most of us go with 18 days. In preference, no one can get 22 because it just gives you that buffer zone. Because most the industry doesn't have a process of return. So if the consumer, the retailer actually milk goes out of date, that's their problem. It's not the industry's problem or the processor's problem. So we needed to actually get the product into China without actually affecting that use-by date, knowing full well that there's a testing regime in Australia that would take 6 days, 5 to 6 days. And we can do most tests relatively quickly, but when you start to do aflatoxin tests, they actually take 5 to 6 days to actually do. Just to run, you can't actually speed the process up, well, not today anyway. So we went to our farms, we figured out all the farms, we tested all the heavy metals, we did everything, and we made sure that the farms had really, really good quality milk. So we did that work. We started to talk to the Chinese government, and we then employed a guy called George Davey, who had worked with Safe Food in Australia, and created the program for quality assurance manuals back in the 80s. Which meant that Australia actually, and the idea of the quality assurance, George's idea of the quality assurance manuals in Australia back in the 80s for New South Wales was to keep Victorian milk out. So the benefits of, the things that we did in the 80s were now becoming the benefits to the industry in 2012-13. So George helped us with the CIQ officials. So we needed to negotiate directly with the CIQ officials about how do we actually get ourselves into China and get past the issue of, we can test it in Australia, 5 days, get it into China, 1 day, 12 hours basically, put it on a plane, get it to China. But how do we actually, and then the idea in China was you need to test it again. Well, if you get to 12, 13 days, you've got no, by the time it gets out of the distribution channel, there's not much left, 5 or 6 days, and people aren't going to, the premium price we want is not going to be there. So George was fortunate. We've actually, through investments in particular areas, we actually have convinced the Chinese officials through a number of activities that they can trust our regimes, and they don't need to test the product again, but there are things that we can do together that will actually ensure that the testing regimes are rigorous and that they can actually independently audit them, and it is a transparent process. So we went through that process, but the final piece that became really, really interesting is we knew we could get it to China, and the first trial shipment that we actually put into China went on shelf. Within 36 hours of it being on shelf, there's a premium product at the same price offered by some Chinese. So how do we keep that premium price in a product without having it counterfeited millions and millions of times? So there's a company called Authenticate, which has just been working on it, and we're actually trialling this process, which is an app you download onto your phone, and you can scan the label, and each bottle has a label. Obviously, each has a label, but it has a code on that it actually has that code is valid from the moment it actually goes past a scanner in the factory, has a seal put on it, and then actually is valid until the life expectancy of that product. Now, when someone scans that product in China, they will be redirected to the Authenticate site, which will tell them everything about that product, where that product come from, and as much information as we wish to put on that site, so we can protect the site. And for us, that was actually a game changer, and it's the piece that the Chinese officials truly did get, is that if you want to keep the premium in that price and you want to protect the reputation of the Australian product going into China, we needed to have something that the consumer actually trusted. Because what we don't get, one of the challenges that we've found in China is that we don't necessarily get what they get. We believe our product's safe. We don't. If something fails in the Australian system, if you have a food quality failure, it's dumped. It's gone. You don't have to worry about going around the back door. You don't have to worry about someone else actually selling it to somebody else. It is gone. Whereas that's not necessarily the case in China. And not to say that I know all about China, but when you talk to the government officials from China, they actually know how corrupt some of their systems are. So that they actually, the people that were paying for this are paying somewhere between $7 and $9 per litre. They're the rich Chinese. They want product. We're not sure whether it's going to be 1 million or 100 million litres they actually want from us over the next 12 months. But what what we do know is their interest is enormous. So if you think about the industry, and I talked earlier about the industry deregulating, and there's lots of mergers and acquisitions. But what they love about us is our provenance story. The fact that we will take them to a farm and we will show them exactly what they want. There's no hidden truths, there's no embarrassments. They get what they see is what they get. And when they look us in the eye, and when they look our farmers in the eye, because